long ball. It's going to go for a touchdown. The game's over. Webster Slaughter.
Metcalf will go for the score. Unbelievable.
45-40. Run, William, run. He's got blockers in front. 5. Touchdown. Joshua Cribbs turns disaster into a score.
Sight wants it all on this one for Logan, and he is there.
Jim Brown to the 30. Jim Brown is going to go in for another touchdown.
The Cleveland Browns select Baker Mayfield.
Wow.
It is Baker Mayfield.
I woke up feeling dangerous.
Hello, Cleveland. Welcome to another edition of the 1085 Gridiron Podcast. I am your host, Jack McCurry, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Anthony Joki. What's going on, man?
Well, it's a very stormy, windy, and actually kind of warm January day, but we had to take some shortcuts while we record today, unfortunately. I don't have my normal set up, but hopefully we'll get through all this Browns talk and without any sort of power issues.
Yes, and it's not just myself and Anthony on this episode. We have a special guest. You guys will know him from Twitter as the BrownsMockDraft guy. He's one of our buddies, been on the episode or on the podcast a few times. Stephen Thomas. Stephen, how you doing, man? Thank you for coming on.
Living the dream. Glad to be back, guys. I always love coming on with you guys. And just so you know, the weather's not all that great out here in LA either. I mean, it's 58 and only partly sunny. So, I'm pretty much just hunkering down with canned goods and waiting for the FEMA trucks to arrive. This is the worst that it gets out here. So I'm with you in spirit with that weather stuff.
You and LeBron.
Have they?
Go ahead.
Have they shut down all the streets by now?
They don't have to. Nobody goes out. It might rain and it's under 60. So why would we go outside? That makes no sense.
You and LeBron are absolutely struggling out there in LA. I don't know how you're doing.
At any rate, it's good to be back with you guys. I love what you guys do, and I'm always grateful that you, for whatever reason, want me to come on and save my idiot stuff on your air. Appreciate it.
Well, you're one of our favorite guests, and we always have a blast talking with you. But yeah, it's great to have you on. Obviously, what are we going to talk about, guys? It's not like we're in the middle of a coaching search or anything, or coming off one of our best seasons in franchise since 1999. So what should we discuss?
Yeah, I think we should record like 4 different head coach sections. That way, whatever happens, you guys can edit out and we can look like geniuses saying we predicted the right thing.
If as of this recording, we're recording on Tuesday afternoon, January 8th, and it looks like we're heading towards the end of the coaching search. It looks like we're down to 2 finalists. I'm using air quotes as I say finalists because I think all signs are pointing to at this point that Freddie Kitchens is going to be the next head coach of the Cleveland Browns. And the other finalist is Vikings offensive coordinator Kevin Stefanski. Those are the 2 known people that are still in the hunt. There might be other people, but I do think at this point it's going to be Freddie Kitchens. Anthony, I'm going to start with you. What is your thoughts on Kitchens potentially being the next coach of the Browns?
Well, I think with Kitchens, the way the offense looked after Hugh Jackson and Todd Haley were both fired in the middle of the season there, ever since then, you could see the development of Baker Mayfield. It was kind of stagnant for a few weeks, and you kind of saw him take a couple steps back. But once Freddie was able to get in there and get his hands on Baker Mayfield and the rest of the offense, you could see everything just start to click. And everyone's looking for the next Sean McVay and whatnot, the next Andy Reid when it comes to being that good head coach that could work well with your quarterback. And what you saw Freddie do as the offensive coordinator for the remainder of the season there, you saw glimpses of very fantastic quarterback play. And I think John Dorsey and the rest of the search committee that we talked about in the last podcast, what they saw is, you see Baker ready to, continue to take those next steps. And if it's going to be Freddie Kitchens, which that's what all signs are to be, I think it's a great move. I think Browns fans have really warmed up to the idea as the offense will show different things from week to week, and I think it would be a great move.
Steven, what is your thoughts on Kitchens being the next coach of the Browns potentially?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Anthony said, and all of us have said. I mean, the difference the last whatever it was, 8 weeks or 9 weeks, whatever it was, when after Freddie took over after the coaching changes, it was so stark and so undeniable. And obviously, Baker was the center of all that, but the improvement in the receiving core, in the tight ends, in the offensive line, and part of that, obviously, let's not overlook the attitude adjustment that Greg Williams gave. Let's give Greg his credit. I don't think he's going to be back. I don't think he's going to be back as the DC, but he held those guys accountable. He's a no-nonsense kind of guy. But as far as it goes with retaining Freddie, it's hard to find the kind of trust and communication and chemistry that became incredibly apparent exists between Freddie and Baker Mayfield. It's very, very hard to find that. And if you think he's going to be the guy in a couple of years, making him the OC this year means you're going to lose him. I mean, if he is what you think he is, he's going to be gone in 2 years, maybe 1 year. Now, some people have said over the course of this week, I know you guys have seen this too in Brown's Twitter and on the radio and everything. Well, you can't hire a guy because you're afraid of losing him. That's living in your fears. And I don't look at it that way. I look at it as, why mess with what we already have? I mean, what are we going to find out there that's better than the chemistry and the communication and the progress? I mean, more stats keep coming out. Every stat that comes out, Baker's in the top 5, Baker's in the top 8, Baker's in the top 2 since the change. I mean, it's why I think our mutual friend Jeff Lloyd said it earlier today. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so if you surround him with some good coordinators, you've got a great front office support staff in place. If you think he's the guy, make him the guy, because let's be honest, as we all know from the past 20 years, not only in Cleveland but everywhere, but especially here in Cleveland, you're going to go as far as Baker Mayfield takes you. So if he likes the guy and he wants the guy, I can't see why you would make another choice. It makes perfect sense from every single angle to me.
Right, I'm right there with you. I mean, we've been, ever since Hugh Jackson got fired, we've all been talking about we have to find that offensive-minded guy that's to pair up with Baker Mayfield. Well, lo and behold, when Hugh Jackson got fired, John Dorsey and the front office in Cleveland did just that. They paired an offensive mind and Freddie Kitchens with Baker Mayfield, and the Browns took off and went 5-3, and some of the best football we've seen since '99. I mean, like you said, and you reiterated what Jeff said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I would agree that I think Freddie Kitchens is the best guy available right now. And you look at these other candidates, and we'll even talk about Stefanski here in a moment. I mean, the track record with some of them hasn't been strong. I'm still baffled that Green Bay hired Matt LaFleur. Now, he might turn out to be the next Sean McVay or something, but his track record and what he did in Tennessee this year doesn't really back up being the first head coaching candidate hire. So, but we'll see how it all plays out. And the other guy we talked about, Kevin Stefanski, the Vikings offensive coordinator, he only was the coordinator there for 3 weeks. And, the Vikings offense did get a little better. It was too little too late for them. They missed out on the playoffs. But I kind of look at him as a Freddie Kitchens type. I don't think he's ready to be a head coach per se. But, I mean, also, I kind of said like a month ago I didn't think Freddie Kitchens was ready to be a head coach. But I could see him, and I think he's going to end up being the offensive coordinator here in Cleveland. Do you guys have a problem with him being the offensive coordinator, or do you think Kitchens has looked at him and seen him as a potential coordinator type?
Yeah, I think, he may hold the title of OC, but it's going to be Freddie's offense. And he'll help game plan. He'll help, with a myriad of other things. Freddie will probably still call the plays, would be my guess, but there's such a difference between being a coordinator and being a head coach, there's so much more responsibility. Stefanski would take over a lot of the day-to-day, I don't want to say paperwork, but that sort of conceptual stuff. And I think for all the reasons we just laid out, but also because Freddie, one of the underrated things, I said something and it seems so obvious, but a lot of people overlook it. He schemed and called plays to the strengths of his offense, not just Baker. I mean, Jake did a great article maybe a week ago about the improvement of the offensive line overall, because Baker barely got touched. His jersey was clean for a month, 2 months. And yes, the offensive line play did improve, obviously, but also some of that was Freddie schemed to what his tackles could do, because our tackle play was average all year. It was adequate, but it was average with Robinson and Hubbard. But they got so much better statistically, and a lot of that was due because you got a guy in Freddie Kitchens who sees what his team can do and can't do, and he puts them in a position to do what they can do, which, again, seems so obvious. But we spent all last offseason with Hugh Jackson. I don't know if you remember the quote saying, we got to get guys who fit my offense. And we had the big debate about, do you get guys who fit your offense or do you fit your offense to your guys? And I've always been a fit your offense to your guys a proponent, and Freddie did that in spades. And again, the difference was undeniable. So I have no problem with Stefanski, but in reality, I think it's going to be Freddie's offense all the way.
Yeah, I think it's going to be Freddie's offense too. But when you look at Stefanski and why he would come here and take this offensive coordinator job, there have been rumors that he wants to be a head coach. And going into next season, who would you rather work with at this point to improve your resume? Would you rather work with Baker Mayfield? Would you rather work with Kirk Cousins?
Yep.
And I think that this would be a great move for Stefanski. And, you look at that structure that the Rams have out there. You have Sean McVay, who's your offensive coordinator in a head coaching spot, but he also has that passing game coordinator and a run game coordinator. And I think those jobs would fall under Stefanski if he comes here to be Freddie Kitchens' offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. He could also even be the running game coordinator because he has a history of working with running backs, although he has more of a history of working with quarterbacks. So, Anthony, I could see your scenario where he would be the passing game coordinator, and maybe they give the running game coordinator job to Ryan Lindley or something, who's been the running backs coach. So it's all really interesting. Hopefully we get some clarity by the end of this week, because some people that I talk to are just living in a crazy world, like looking at every single rumor and like creating their own scenarios for it, and it's giving me a headache at this point. I just hope that whatever they do, it gets done soon, because
come on, Jack, this is fun, this is a blast.
I mean, I love it. I think it's funny just because Twitter is some of the greatest stuff ever. I still can't believe it's free, but some of the takes are just making my head hurt, including one I just seen by Hiram that suggested we trade Baker so that as long as the NFL ensures us Trevor Lawrence. So it's Twitter gets to be too much sometimes.
All the world's a stage, man. All the world's a stage.
I guess.
And it'll only get better once free agency comes around and the draft comes around. So it only gets better from here.
When the Browns make the playoffs, I cannot wait for the takes that are going to come out of this. It's going to be a beautiful time to be a Browns fan. But before we get to 2019, let's go back to 2018. Steven, what was your overall thoughts on the Browns season and how everything turned out the way it did?
Well, I mean, who wouldn't be thrilled? We'd have liked to see them squeeze out another win here and there and get into the playoffs. But realistically, they were a year ahead of it. We saw what happened when they went up against the playoff teams. They're ready to compete, but they had to take this step because they hadn't figured out how to close it out yet. So I think at the beginning of the year, there was a lot of us who were saying, if you take out the Hugh factor, this is roughly an 8-8 team, roughly a 500 team. And I had said, I remember, I think it was with you guys on a pod in the summer, that if if they were going to do that, I wanted the first half of the season to be rough so that they would make a coaching change. Because if they came out, 4-4 or something like that, that would give Jimmy Haslam fuel to keep around HJ for another season. And so it actually, from a win-loss standpoint, worked out for the best that they were 2-5-1, 2-6-1, whatever they were when the change happened. And I think the most exciting thing is, obviously the most exciting thing is Baker Mayfield, but in a larger sense, it's not just Baker. It's the defensive line guys are starting to grow. Joe Show had another great year. Demarius Randall was absolute thievery in that trade. What a great pickup, both on the field and in the locker room. The Brashad Perriman turnaround is astonishing. And if it's real, if he really is the guy that we saw here, what a pickup that would be. I think that the greatest thing about this season shows that we are on the upswing, and with just a few moves here this offseason, legitimately start, quote, in the window next season. It's probably the most exciting time I can remember since the 80s, because I know I'm older than you guys, where you're legitimately counting the days until training camp starts because you want wins, and they're realistic, and it's not, I can't wait till the season starts so we can make all of our, LOL Browns jokes again and all that kind of stuff. It's the way this season progressed. There is really not, with the exception of interior defensive line, there is really not a huge, glaring, gaping roster hole. There are places where you need to get better to take that next step from a 500 team to a double-digit win team and a contender. You could probably add a tackle if you wanted to. You could add another rush guy. They need to upgrade the linebacker core. Maybe one more corner, because they seem to rotate a lot of the guys outside of Denzel. But other than that, I mean, they don't need a wide receiver. I know everybody's been talking about it, but with this wide receiver class, we'll get to that in a minute, I'm sure. You could wait till day 2 or easily day 3 if you wanted to. You could add another receiving tight end, and this is a great class to do it in, to pair him up with Chief and get those mismatches. You could grab a running back, but you don't need one. You grab one on day 3. I mean, really, there's nowhere that we're going into the offseason saying, okay, my God, we have to get, and then laying out 8 different positions. And that's a new thing for us. So we have to change our thinking into just a few targeted guys. And here's something else interesting, too, as we start looking at free agency. When you're in the window, free agents over 30 are not automatically off the table anymore. I mean, for the past 2 years, anybody, over 28 really didn't make any sense for us because we were building for 2019, 2020, 2021. Well, now, if you think you're in your window and you got a guy like, one of the big names that's been talked about the last week or so, it looks like Tampa might be moving on from Gerald McCoy. Now, he's going to be 31 years old, and he's not the Gerald McCoy he was 5 years ago, but his contract is reasonable. There's no dead cap if you want to move on from him, and he's probably still got 2 or 3 more years producing at a pretty high level. He'd be a perfect guy, locker room guy, on top of what he does on the field. Whereas 2 years ago, adding a 31-year-old Gerald McCoy would have made little sense. Now, this year, you can make a case for it. I'm not saying he's your first call and you desperately have to go out and get him, but if the opportunity presents itself, adding a Gerald McCoy or a Brandon Graham, or, I've seen people say Golden Tate at wide receiver for a short contract that's reasonable. It's something to be considered this year. And the fact that this team, when you think about where we were in the summer, well, think about where we were in September and October, for crying out loud, and where we are now. Could you have imagined that we'd be this positive going into the offseason? The turnaround is dramatic. And I think that's the biggest thing that Browns fans have to take away from this season, is that it's here. It's finally here. We have paid our dues, and by all appearances, it is time for us to finally have some fun.
Yeah, I mean, you just nailed everything right on the head. Going prior to this past season, I was hoping like 5 or 6 wins, and then we'd have a solid off season and a draft and free agency, and then maybe sneak into the wild card in 2019. Now I'm like, we won 7 games, could have won more, but I mean, hindsight's 2020 now. But going into this off season, we have a ton of cap space again. We have one of the best front offices in the league. We have so much established talent. And I said it during the Ravens game on Sunday. I said the Browns are winning the AFC North, and I haven't had that much confidence in this team in a long time. I think probably after the 2007 season, I thought the Browns are going to be contenders in 2008 and maybe even 2009, and we all know how that played out. But as long as everything stays intact and nothing crazy happens, which this is Cleveland still, we saw that mentality that something's going to go wrong at some point, but I feel really good about the direction this franchise is going in right now, and I'm very optimistic about what's going to happen in 2019 and 2020, and I'm sure Anthony feels the same way.
Most definitely, and last offseason, Steven said some of it as well. We were kind of cautiously optimistic, and with the Hugh factor, we thought this wasn't going to be a 7-8 win football team. We thought it would probably be less, but after they made that coaching change, this entire franchise completely turned around. The weight was lifted off his shoulders, and once you got rid of him, the development of everybody else just took off. And when that happened, Steven mentioned the windows started opening up, and you go into this year's free agency class, the Browns, for the first time in who knows how long, if not ever, are a free agent destination.
Yes,
and especially with all the cap space that they have, all the younger players that they have, what's looking like to be an offensive-minded head coach. Guys are going to want to come here, and especially where it's up for grabs next season. And Jack, I think you're right when you say that the Browns go in the North. I think I don't know if there's any odds on it yet, but I would tend to say that the Browns might have the best odds to win the AFC North next year. And it's just a fantastic place to be, one that we're not familiar with at all. So that's why this ride is going to be incredibly fun this offseason.
Steven, you talked about Gerald McCoy, and I think another player that you've mentioned about as a potential free agent target was Jadeveon Clowney. Obviously, I think if you had to pick one, I think everybody would go with Clowney, but I don't think you could go wrong with either option. And looking at the list, if somehow D Ford or even a Trey Flowers went on the open market, I could see the Browns going after those guys, because while we have Agba opposite Garrett, I don't think you could never have enough pass rushers on a team. And if any of these guys were to go on the open market, Grady Jarrett from Atlanta as well, the Browns should be all over that, because I think the biggest thing on that defensive front, they need depth. And if they can get some players like that, I mean, having Agba and having some of the other guys we have on the defensive line as depth, I think it would feel really good compared to how it was during the season when Ogunjobi and Garrett were playing way too many snaps.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. And because I know our mutual friend Jack Duffin is listening, let me assure him up front, we're not advocating spending all the cap space this year, Jack. Calm down, okay? But targeted aggression, you are absolutely right. I can't see New England letting Trey Flowers go. He was their only consistent pressure generator. But yeah, if he hits the market, he would be right near the top, because I think the DeMarcus Lawrences and the Grady Jarretts, yeah, it would be great, but Dallas and Atlanta would have to be insane to let them hit the market. If they do, I'm driving a dump truck full of money onto their lawn, but I can't see it happening. More realistic, maybe Trey Flowers. Frank Clark in Seattle on the field, but he carries the off-field stuff. I don't know if they would do that. I think Clowney probably from reading some of the stuff in Houston, they're leaning towards him being out of Houston, but probably more in a tag and trade type thing. I don't think they're just going to let him walk. And so then the question becomes, how much do you want to give up for Jadeveon Clowney? I'm sure there's going to be a bidding war, and it might get, out of hand. And you certainly don't want to handicap yourself from a draft picks perspective. But yeah, adding Clowney across from Miles and then sliding, you mentioned Emmanuel Ogbah, sliding him in, to play more free technique than edge is probably better for his skill set. Plus, he would give us valuable depth, like you said, on the interior defensive line. The interior defensive line market is actually, on the surface anyway, potentially just as deep. You got David Irving down in Dallas. Sheldon Richardson in Minnesota is a free agent. He's only 28. Seems like he's been in the league for 30 years, but he's only 28. And then you've got the other guys that they would be nice, but they're more run stuffer guys. Your Jonathan Hankins, Michael Pierce, Malcolm Brown type guys. And I don't know if they would want to go that route, but if you're signing those guys with someone else or drafting someone else, that could be a route that they would go. Gerald McCoy, like we mentioned, Brandon Graham I mentioned before. I know some people are high on Ziggy Ansah on a year or two. I don't know if they would be interested in him. He's been hurt so much. And then you've got the guys who are young but haven't really lived up to their draft billing, so they're sort of athletic reclamation type guys. Dante Fowler out in L.A., Mario Edwards in New York, really athletic guys that have just never produced. Maybe you think your defensive coordinator can squeeze out of them what hasn't been squeezed out of them before. I don't know if they would go that route, but it's something to consider. They're young, very athletic, like I said, and they might, maybe being across from Myles Garrett is the panacea that any young edge rusher needs. I mean, Myles is occupying 2 or 3 guys. If you can't consistently beat a double team like that, then maybe you shouldn't be here. But yeah, it's interesting to look at those kind of things. And then, cornerback, Bashaud Breeland is the one that I would be having my eyes on early. They were really interested in him last year from everything that we heard before the foot injury, and then he landed in Green Bay and ended up being hurt. But he's still only, 25, 26, something like that. And apparently the foot is totally healed and his knee is totally healed. And so he's basically in the same situation he was last off season. I would be very curious to at least bring him in and have another meeting and all that kind of stuff. And the only other place I would really go, and I don't know that they need to, but the tackle market is not very good. But Jawan James is, from what we've read, more likely on his way out in Miami. And he's a very solid right tackle. So if you wanted to get him on a reasonable contract, he's somewhere in his mid to late 20s, a solid right tackle. And then you could keep either Hubbard or Des Harrison, whichever one you prefer. My guess from a contract stipulation would be Hubbard as your swing tackle. I could see that, but again, they don't have to. Like we said, they could come back with their 11 starting offensive personnel right now as is, and I don't think it would anger anybody. I mean, and when's the last time we could say that? I don't know if there's any free agents that you guys are desperate to have. There's some guys that would be nice, and I think they need to make some moves on the defensive line, but there's nobody that I'm like pining for like we have in past years.
No, not really. Looking at the top 50 list, there's really nobody I'm pining for. I mean, like I said, Clowney would be nice. Gerald McCoy, if he becomes available, would be nice. But, I'm looking at it now, just depth pieces. But, looking at the list, and you mentioned cornerback, I think this is a name we should keep our eye on just because of the ties with Dorsey. Steven Nelson, 25-year-old corner out of Kansas City. It was a third-round pick by Dorsey in 2015. He's having a solid season. I don't know what Kansas City's cap situation is, but if he becomes available, wouldn't be shocked if you see him linked to Cleveland just because of the Dorsey connection.
Absolutely. I've seen things that say they're definitely wanting to keep him around, but everybody says that at this time of year. Steven Nelson, or Justin Coleman in Seattle, I think would be perfect. But if you ask me to guess right now, I would lean towards both of them remaining where they are. Their teams finding ways to keep them in. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Steven Nelson would be a great addition, in my opinion.
Anthony, is there a free agent that you absolutely want the Browns to get this offseason?
Well, I think I've talked to you. I've been on the Clowney bandwagon for a while, and just throw dumps and dumps of truckloads of money at him. But we'll see if they ever let him hit the market. I know Houston has a few free agents where they have to decide who they're going to franchise tag, who are they going to transition tag, and whatnot. So I would say that's definitely one to keep an eye on. If I remember correctly, in terms of linebackers, C.J. Mosley is a free agent. I don't know if Baltimore's going to let him go, but if the Browns were somehow able to land him in the middle of that defense, that would be pretty devastating. A, to hurt the Baltimore Ravens, and B, to just boost your running defense incredibly.
Baltimore's got decisions to make because
they do.
Zadarius Smith's a free agent, and Mosley. Now, of course, if they move Flacco, money's going to open up for them to get those guys, keep those guys intact. And obviously, with Lamar Jackson being on his rookie deal, they're going to probably want to look to keep the core around him for sure for the next few years.
Yeah, they've also got Michael Pierce, so they've got some decisions to make. Mosley would be. Wow, that would be a great addition right there. And I'm with you, Anthony. If the opportunity to get Jadeveon Clowney and line him up on the other end of that front four from Myles Garrett arises, and it's not, quarterback type money, I would love that. That would be fantastic. If you could somehow pick him up, and then we mentioned Gerald McCoy. They're talking about just cutting him, which I think that's a signal to the rest of the league to say, call and make us an offer. So if you could flip, a couple day 3 picks, because I don't know how many people are going to be bidding, and I don't know if it's going to get, but we've got 3 5ths and 2 7ths, and maybe you throw a 5th and a 6th, or something like that for Gerald McCoy, and then get Clowney as well. You're done. As far as I'm concerned, you're done in free agency right there. And then you draft a couple young guys to learn behind them on the defensive line, so that in a few years, those guys can move into bigger roles. I just don't see how an opposing quarterback survives a Sunday against that defensive front seven.
Anthony, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I'm ready to talk draft, especially because Steven's here.
It's about damn time.
Steven, this is completely, back when Hugh got fired, and Anthony goes, all right, I think I'm going to get Steven on to talk draft. And I'm like, dude, let's just wait. I said, let's just see how the season plays out. I said, and then we were winning, and he's like, all right, I'm ready to talk draft. I got a mock draft ready. I said, I'm not doing it, Anthony. I said, the Browns are winning right now. I don't want to talk draft. I said, we can wait till January, and then we'll have 4 months to talk draft. I think Anthony got mad at me at some points. I think he was probably contemplating kicking me off the pod, but I'm ready now on January 8th to start talking draft.
That we're doing a solo episode where I just sat there and talked draft for an hour to myself to get it all out.
All right. Well, Steven, you're our go-to guy when it comes to draft talk. And my first question to you is, how are you coping with the fact the Browns are picking 17th in the 2019 draft?
I'm freaking out. I'm freaking out. I don't know what the hell's going on. It's weird. Like I don't have my choice of everybody in the draft, and I think it should be against the NFL laws or something. I don't know. It's it is weird because, especially, I'm sort of, an extreme case because I do it every day, but anybody who's interested in the draft, 0-16 last year, and they were 0-14 the year before they got that one win. So basically we have been, as Cleveland Browns fans, on the clock at 1 for 2 consecutive years, nonstop. And now having to wait and see what 16 other slots do before we even think about our guy, it's a wonderful thing, but it is something, it's a brave new frontier that we have to look at. And what it means is, and especially since we're not looking for a quarterback, it's January 8th, to lock into we have to get this position, or even worse, we have to get this guy at 17, or I'm going to be mad in January is just nuts. We have to consider 100 different scenarios at this point because, and all of them depend on what we just spent the last 10 minutes talking about. If they go big in free agency, obviously that will alter what they do at 17. And I think the first thing we need to think about as Browns fan is they have 11 picks. I'll be absolutely shocked if they make 11 picks. Adding 11 more rookies to this roster as we enter the window just doesn't seem smart and doesn't seem like anything that a John Dorsey-led front office would do. So trade ups, trade outs for next year, to move assets into future assets, that could happen. And we've said this for a couple of months now, flipping a couple of picks in February or March for veterans, like we just said, maybe the Gerald McCoy situation, but other similar type deals, it's very possible this year. So at this point, at 17, I mean, obviously, yeah, on paper, interior defensive line is the number one need, but we don't know who's going to be there. And so you got to play the board. You got to get the right value. Defensive tackle is definitely an option. Edge could be an option. Corner. I could be talked into a linebacker or maybe even a tackle if the right things happen in free agency ahead of them. The one thing that I know a lot of people have been talking about for a couple of months, I would be shocked if they went wide receiver in the first round. That's the only thing I think is just, I mean, you never say never, but I would be stunned. So, I mean, right now, especially here in January, rather than trying to lock in, like last year at this time, we were all arguing the quarterbacks and everybody pretty much had their guy by this point. At 17, it's better to talk yourself into a range of guys. Okay, if this guy's here, but that guy's not, then this first guy would be okay with me, but I'd prefer the other guy, if he's there. That sort of mentality is much better to get in at this point. A Christian Wilkins or a Draymond Jones is certainly possible. Jeffrey Simmons, because of his off-field, you can't discount him being there at 17. On the field, he's easily a top 10, top 8, maybe, top 6 type guy. But that video is bad, and it's going to be played a lot during draft season. So if he fell to 17, I would be very, very happy to get Jeffrey Simmons. As far as the edge guys, because like you said, Jack, you can never have too many pass rushers. There's a decent chance that one of, depending on how they shake out, Ja'Kai Polite, Burns, and Cleveland Farrell might be around at 17, or at least in a range that you can trade up a few spots and grab them. Some people like Montez Sweat in that range. I don't like him that high, but he's a name to get familiar with. Devin White, a lot of people really, really want to grab Devin White or Devin Bush from Michigan. The double Devins are the linebacker guys that might be in that range. Byron Murphy's an absolute stud at corner. I can't imagine Greedy falls that far, but if he's there, he would be somebody that you would have to consider. And his running buddy, Christian Fulton, although it seems like he's going back, but I love Christian Fulton. And then if they have, like we just talked about, let's say they have the dream free agency and they get Clowney and they get McCoy and they get, Steven Nelson and they sign CJ Mosley. Let's say they have that kind of thing and they decide they want to go with the tackle. Williams is probably going to be gone. But Yadni Kajust out of West Virginia, if his medicals check out on his knees, that's a guy I could rather easily be talked into in a certain set of circumstances at 17. I'm not sure what you guys are thinking, but at this point, there's just way too many options and unknown variables ahead of us that we have no control over to be locking yourself into the mentality of, if we don't get this guy, I'm going to be mad. Because, I mean, like you said, Jack, unlike years past, we don't have control over the draft anymore. We've got 16 teams ahead of us before we get to have our say.
Yeah, I mean, this is the lowest we've drafted without trading up or down or whatever since 2003 when we took Jeff Fain, with I think the 21st pick, I think it was. I had to double check, but I remember looking that up after the Baltimore game. But yeah, I'm at the point where just take the best player available. I trust Dorsey, Wolf, Highsmith, that entire front office, that they're going to do what's best for this organization. I mean, outside of the Chad Thomas pick, I have no complaints about that draft last year. I thought, they went out, did what they were going to do, and I thought it was a home run draft for their first one. So, I mean, I don't know where Anthony stands on it, but I'm definitely like best player available at this point until I get a sense of who I like and who I don't like. That could potentially be around the 17th pick.
Some people would probably throw that Corbett pick into that Chad Thomas one as well. Maybe not that bad, but you probably could have got a better player at that point. But when you're looking at this year, yeah, I'm all for best available. I think it's kind of like what we did with the number 4 pick last year, and Steven alluded to it. You prepare yourself for 3 or 4 different guys at that selection, and you'll be happy with any one of them. I would say last year at 4, we would have been happy with Saquon or Bradley Chubb or Denzel or a couple other guys, and that's what you're gonna have to do this year at number 17. And for me, I think this offseason, Dorsey is going to be very aggressive. So I would not be surprised if they trade if they're not able to get, one of those top pass rushers in free agency or even just an average one. I wouldn't be surprised if Dorsey, packages together a couple picks. Steven mentioned that they're not going to add 11 rookies to this team. So if you package a couple picks, go up and get one of the guys that are going to go in the top 10, I could see that happen right now. And if you're able to pair another star pass rusher next to Myles Garrett, I feel for any quarterback that goes against the Browns next season. And, look, Lamar Jackson isn't anything to write home about right now. Roethlisberger's getting up there. Who knows what the heck the Bengals are going to do with their quarterback position this offseason. So to terrorize quarterbacks in the division for the next 7-8 years with those guys, with Myles Garrett and whoever else, whether it be Josh Allen or, whoever, if they're able to trade up that high enough to get, I'm all for it. You wouldn't be able to complain.
Yeah, I'm with you, and this is such a deep class. I mean, you guys know that day 2 and day 3 are my favorites. Day 3 is I love digging deep and trying to find the values like the Jannard Avery pick last year. I love trying to find those guys, and in the wide receiver class especially, day 3 is going to be nuts. But you get into day 2, and there are, if they can't get a Simmons or a Wilkins or a Draymond or whoever their guy is. In day 2, you've got Gerald Willis, you've got Isaiah Buggs, you've got Rashard Lawrence. Charles Omenihu at Texas is an absolute beast. If they could, it's sort of the bottom end of both of their ranges, at least at this point. But if they could walk from 17 and 49 with Jeffrey Simmons and Charles Omenihu, I'm thrilled. That's a great draft for me right there. But then you got the small school guys, O'Shane Jimenez. And I know Anthony's a fan of Jalen Ferguson like I am. Those guys are currently valued day 2. You put them and let them develop across the line from Myles. That'd be fantastic. Linebacker is a pretty sweet spot on day 2. Jermaine Pratt out of North Carolina State is really fast. Joe Giles Harris is a favorite. You got Dennis Daly or maybe Greg Little at tackle on day 2. Andre Dillard out of Washington State is super fast and got great feet. That would be great. And then the tight end class, I know I mentioned it a little bit ago, and people say, oh, why would you want a tight end? Yeah, we do. We have Chief, and Darren Fells has been much more than we thought he was going to be. I don't see Seth's future being in Cleveland as much as I like him. And in this class, you could add, currently valued on day 2, Irv Smith, Dawson Knox, T.J. Hawkinson, Jace Sternberger, Caden Smith, Zach Gentry, Caleb Wilson, on and on and on. And you think about those guys and the 2 tight end matchup problems that teams give opposing defenses in the NFL these days, that's a very, very attractive potential pick because we've got 3 day 2 picks. Andy Isabella is going to become, if he is not already, a Browns Twitter favorite. And pairing him and his particular skill set with Baker Mayfield. I could easily be talked into that. Antoine Wesley out of Texas Tech. I love that guy. Denzel Mims at Baylor. If they take him, we'll hear the caterwauling about another Baylor wide receiver, but boy, can that guy play. Devo Samuel. I mean, there's so many guys on day 2 that they could go get. And the defensive line class, it just keeps going into day 3. Daniel Wise, Cortez Broughton, Greg Gaines, Rennell Wren, who's an athletic freak at Arizona State, if he can ever figure it out. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities from day 2 and even into day 3 that they could really, really add a lot of talent to this team at positions of need without reaching. It's just that deep. It's set up really, really well for us this year, even if they only make 7 or 8 picks. If they package stuff like Anthony said and move up, or they move out, trade stuff and pick up future assets, even if they only make 7 picks, they could really, really improve the team in the draft from this year. It's a fun class, and if you haven't started digging into it yet, for the people that are listening, you're going to have a blast when you do it. There's really a lot of great athletes and good kids out there this year.
Anthony, how are you holding up knowing that Colin Johnson announced he was staying in Texas this year?
I'm just completely heartbroken. I guess we'll just have to draft him in the first round next year, if he's available, because I would imagine another year there he might go in the top half of the first round. But I think in terms of the draft, and I think the Browns are finally in a position that the Pittsburgh Steelers were in for so many years. The Steelers, when you're able to retain your starters on offense and on defense for years and years and years, you're able to draft and develop guys. And, there'd be years when you play the Steelers, you're like, who the hell is that guy? And you're like, when did he get there? And you realize they've been sitting behind the starter who left in free agency for 3 or 4 years.
Right.
And they've been able to develop and learn the system and whatnot. And that's why the Steelers have been so good for so long. And I think when you look at the Browns offense and the Browns defense, I think that the players that are there now, the Browns are able to do that with draft picks. And there will always be injuries. No one, you don't want to wish it upon anybody, but there will always be injuries. So having depth on both offense and defense is crucial. And, you can see it with the Eagles, and thankfully they have a good backup quarterback. But when you look at having all the extra guys sitting behind and learning and gaining experience for 2 or 3 years, it's crucial. And it's nice that the Browns are finally able to start doing that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said, if they can add depth, and then in a couple of years, if they have to let guys go and those guys can step up and make an impact, much like you said with like the guys on the Steelers and the Ravens and whatnot, then the Browns are heading in a right direction. Steven, when we talk about draft, obviously we don't have to talk about quarterback anymore, but obviously the top one declared for the draft yesterday, and Dwayne Haskins, and I already made the prediction that I think he's going to be the number 1 pick in the draft. Steven, as a guy that, watches draft prospects, when you look at Haskins, do you think he will be justified as the top quarterback taken, and do you think he could be the number 1 pick in the draft despite everybody thinking Joey Bosa has been the lock for like the last year?
Well, let me start by saying I have watched very, very little of I've watched his games, but I haven't studied that much of any of the quarterbacks this year.
Ain't that a great feeling, though?
Yes, and mostly it was a matter of protest. It was yes, I know I should be looking at these guys, but damn it, I'm not going to do it. And but from what I've seen of this quarterback class, I think you could be very right. And with the situation in Arizona being what it is, they've got, at least they think they've got, their guy in Josh Rosen, who I still think is going to have a fantastic career. They just hired Kingsbury, and I think from a schematic standpoint, that matchup of him with Rosen and Christian Kirk already out there is solid. But they have so many holes on that team. There is nothing. The fact that he made it through the season alive is amazing. So and they already have solid edge rush out in Arizona. So as much as Bosa might come out as the number one prospect, it doesn't mean that he's going to be the number one pick. I think you could very well be right. If they get the right offer, and I'm not saying, drop down to 20 or something, but if they can stay in the top, 5 or 6 and pick up a few extra pieces this year and a few extra pieces next year, I would be apt to do that if I were the Arizona Cardinals. I would want to find a tackle. I would want to find a guard. I would want to find if they can drop down to 4 and still grab an Ed Oliver or something like that, to put alongside on the defensive line. I could see that. I could see that very easily happening just from a pieces and parts and draft overlook perspective. Now, I don't have any insight into what the Arizona situation is or what their front office looks like or how they approach the draft. That's just stepping back and looking from the 200-foot view and going, yeah, if they get the right offer, somebody blows them away. The Jaguars blow them away because they think Haskins is the guy. I could easily see that.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think that someone's going to come calling, and I think it'd be the Giants, the Raiders, or the Jaguars as the 3 teams most likely to move up for a quarterback. The Raiders, I would probably put them as the favorite because, A, I think they're going to get rid of Derek Carr, which, God bless him, he needs to go to a better situation than that. And, B, they have 3 first-round picks, and if Gruden wants to get a new quarterback, he's got the ammo to do so. I think that's the only quarterback I really want to talk about just because he's from Ohio State. I mean, Anthony might kill me for wanting to talk quarterbacks in the draft, but that's the only guy worth talking about, in my opinion, just because he's a Buckeye.
And I wouldn't be surprised because I know the Browns are probably going to move on from Tyrod Taylor. I would not be surprised if late in day 3 the Browns took a quarterback. You always could have those guys, as a backup that you kind of develop and then, flip down the road for future assets, looking at like a Matt Flynn kind of situation. But, there's always, I wouldn't be surprised if, late in day 3, the Browns take another quarterback to be their backup next year.
It's certainly possible. It wouldn't surprise me. I personally would lean towards bringing in a veteran. I think adding another young guy to that room probably doesn't make a ton of sense, but you could certainly see it. And I think I would have to go back and look. I think John Dorsey has a history of that. He takes a lot of day 3 quarterbacks for that exact reason. So, yeah, that could happen, especially if you get to, let's say they keep 9 picks. By the time you get to the 8th and 9th pick, I mean, what's left to fill? I mean, that's where you take shots at guys like that. Now, of course, I'll have some day 3 sleepers, some deep sleepers that I'll be pining for. But, yeah, I could see that happening.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, Dorsey learned under Ron Wolf, who, I mean, you look at Green Bay, they traded for Brett Favre, and then in drafts after that, they took Matt Hasselbeck. They signed Kurt Warner as an undrafted rookie, Mark Brunell, Aaron Brooks. I mean, they're not afraid to take quarterbacks and stockpile them and maybe potentially turn into assets. So I would tend to agree with Anthony. I wouldn't be shocked if they took a quarterback on day 3 because you look at the track record of Dorsey, who learned under Wolf. He could very well do that too. So it'll be very interesting. You guys want to discuss anything else before we get on out of here?
No, I mean, I've got, I would throw in, I don't know if he wants to play another year, but I would be curious now that the previous regime is gone, if I think Josh McCown as a 1-year backup would be an interesting option. The guy can still come in and win you a game or two if Baker goes down. Baker goes down for more than a game or two, we're screwed anyway, so that, it doesn't really matter after that. But somebody like that would be interesting. Other than that, I mean, it's just a really exciting time right now. I mean, it's fun to log into Browns Twitter every day, isn't it? I mean, when's the last time you could say you were really looking this much forward to next season?
Like I said, it's been since 2008 for me. After that 07 season, that was probably the most excited I've been going into a Brown season was 08, and then obviously the free fall that happened after that. But you're right, it's going to be an exciting time for sure.
Definitely. You could maybe say the last exciting time was, when Hoyer was quarterback and they started out really well. What was that, 2013? That it was kind of fun then, but we saw how quickly that died off. But this time it's different. And, logging into Twitter, talking with Steven, talking with other guys on this podcast, just when me and Jack record, this podcast has become much more enjoyable over the course of the last couple months. I'm not going to lie, last season during 0-16, it was quite the task to get on here and talk Browns when, it was terrible and it just sucked. But winning makes everything better. Winning is a cure-all, and there's going to be a lot more winning over the course of the next 7 to 10 years with Baker as our quarterback.
Absolutely. I'm with you guys. It's all needles pointing up, man.
Definitely. Winning cures everything. Steven, once again, man, we thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You are a joy to talk to. I feel like I learn a lot more listening to you ramble about draft prospects and everything, but it's always a pleasure to speak to you, my man.
Always a pleasure to be on. My wife would quibble with you saying that you enjoy talking to me, but I will present that to her and see what she says. Always love coming on with you guys. Love talking to you guys on Twitter. Love talking to any Browns fan, anywhere, anytime. I actually I was at the dry cleaner 2 days ago, had my hat on, and a guy from across the parking lot yelled out, "Go Browns! I was at the Bengals game!" And I've never gotten that in Southern California before. So that's where we are at this point.
Go ahead. I was going to, Steven, I got one more question for you. Are you going to go to that Arizona game next year out there in Arizona?
Either Arizona or San Francisco, or maybe both. At least one of them for sure.
I would say if you had to pick one, pick the Arizona one, because you saw what Baker did with Hugh Jackson on the other sideline. Just wait till you see what he does with Cliff Kingsbury on the sideline out there in Arizona. It's going to be wonderful.
Let's hope there aren't kids watching, right?
Yes.
Let's hope that it's the second of the season opening Monday Night Football doubleheader, because the kids will be in bed and won't have to see what Baker does to Cliff.
It definitely has the potential to be fun. Yeah.
Steven, do you have anything you want to plug before we get on out of here?
No, not really. I mean, at BrownsMockDraft. I'm doing stuff on our mutual friend Jake Burns' Browns Film Breakdown site now, and when the website launches, I'll be doing a couple other things. Don't want to talk about any of that right now, but other than that, just follow me at BrownsMockDraft. I love talking to Browns fans. I love debating, especially if you're a draft freak like I am, because I'm going to tweet a lot about the draft between now and April. Other than that, no, I just let's all have fun, man. Let's be in a good mood.
Anthony, go ahead and do your thing and plug away.
All right. As always, you can follow the show on Twitter and on Facebook at 1085 Gridiron. You can follow me personally at Anthony Joki, Joki. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. We'd absolutely appreciate it. You can find our podcast on pretty much any platform that you can think of, including iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. We absolutely appreciate all you guys listening to us, and as always, we appreciate Steven coming on and talking draft with us for the first time. Thank goodness this finally happened. We got, a few months till the draft, and I'm glad we were finally able to get in our first draft talk. So thank you, Steven.
Always a pleasure, gentlemen. Thanks for having me on.
As always, you can follow me on Twitter at jmccurrycle and check out my site, thenorthcoastsports.com, for all the latest on Cleveland sports. And as we get on out of here, as Anthony likes to leave us, I will do it as well. Go Browns.